Hello and welcome to today's lesson. We're going to be looking at questions under the Study Island lesson in Algebra 2 called Polynomial Graphs. And this is where I've pulled out questions that can be done solely on the graphing calculator. So some of the questions in this lesson can be done just by looking at the graph they give you. And I didn't include those, I just included the ones where they don't give you the graph and you need to use the graphing calculator. And so these also cover questions under the standard 2.6b and c in Algebra 2. And the calculator that I'm using is the TI-84 Plus. And so this is a great alternative to questions that you might want a way to double check yourself on or that you get stuck on a lot. It's great to know how to do all of these questions using a pen and pencil also, but this is a tool that you have available to you on your Algebra 2 UI, so it's great to also know how to take advantage of it. So as I'm going through these questions, take time to write down the steps that I'm doing to solve them so that you can have those notes to refer back to when you are trying these problems on your own. This first question gives us a function f of x equals x cubed minus x squared minus 2x, and then it gives us 4 graphs and wants to know which one does it match. And so I can use the graphing calculator to graph it and then match the screen to the correct answer choice. So I'm going to turn it on and go to y equals, and I'm going to clear out any old problems there that might remain, and I'm going to type in the function that they give me. And so I'm going to do x cubed, so I'm going to press this button beside alpha to get an x to show up. And then I'm going to use the caret button to create an exponent, and I'm going to type a 3 there. That's the only exponent, that's the end of the exponent, so I use a right arrow to finish. Minus x squared minus 2x. And then I'm going to look at what the x and y axis start and end at here, and I'm going to go into Window and have my screen look exactly the same. So it starts and ends at -5 and 5 for both axes. So for x min, I'm going to tell it to start the x-axis at -5. For x max, I'm going to tell it to stop the x-axis at +5. And scale just means that there'll be a tick mark every 1 unit, just like there is in this screen. So I'm going to leave that alone. And then I'm going to do the same for the y-axis. And then I'm going to press graph, and it will be graphing using the exact same window. So here, the graph starts in the 3rd quadrant, goes up, and then snakes around and ends in the 1st quadrant. And it looks like it's crossing through the origin. So in general, this graph is increasing. So W here, the graph starts in the 2nd quadrant, not the 3rd, so it's not the answer. And the same with x, starts in the wrong spot. Okay, so y here, it starts at the right spot, goes through -1, 0, and then back through 2. And so here, this one looks like it goes through -1, 0, and 2 also, so y could be the answer. Z is a U shape. This is definitely not a U shape. So that means y is going to be the correct choice in making A my final answer. This question here is very similar, only they've just reversed the question so that the question gives you the graph and then the equations are the answer. So I'm going to have to try each of these answers individually and see which one has a graph that matches. And so I'm going to go ahead and go into y equals and type choice A, which is going to be x caret button 3 right arrow plus 3x squared minus 6x minus 8. And then I'm going to go into Window. In the window that I'm given here, the x-axis starts at -5 and goes through 3. So I'm going to have it start at -5 and go through 3 with a tick mark every 1 unit, so I leave that alone. And then the y-axis starts at -12 and goes through +12. So I'm going to have it go through -12 and +12 on the screen also. And then I'm going to press graph. And here, it looks like they look pretty similar. So if I look at the x-axis, it looks like it's crossing at -1, and then -2, -3, -4 also, and then also at +1, 2 also. And then here, it looks like, it looks like it's crossing around -8, but that's kind of hard to count. But what I can do is I can go to the second table and look at some points. So here, I know it crosses the x-axis at -1, 0, so that means I should have -1, 0 on my table, which I do right here. It crosses at -4, 0. That's a point on the graph, so that should be a point on my table, and it is, -4, 0. And the same with 2, 0. That's a point on my graph, and it's a point on my table also. And then 0, -8 is a point on my graph, and it's a point on my table also. So that's the way, this one is really looking like the correct answer. And so I'm thinking A is going to be my correct answer, but then you can go through B, C, and D also to see if they're wrong answers. And so I can show you how a wrong answer would look. So if we go type in B, that would be negative, and make sure you use the negative button and not the minus button, or else the calculator is going to give you an error. So -x, caret button 3, right arrow, plus 3x squared, plus 6x, minus 8. And since I've already set the window, I can just press graph. And here, this one, it starts in the second quadrant instead of starting in the third quadrant, so it's not going to be a right answer. So B is definitely out. And you would go through each C and D also and compare the graph and compare points on the table, and you would see that C and D are also incorrect answers. So your final answer here is going to be A. So this question here gives you a function, and it asks you about characteristics of the graph. So you're going to have to know that this is the first quadrant, this is the second quadrant, this is the third quadrant, and this is the fourth quadrant. And you're going to have to know increasing means the graph is going up from left to right, and decreasing means the graph is going down from left to right. So it's just a little bit of a vocabulary review from Algebra 1. So to do this problem, I'm going to go into y equals and clear out my old problem, and type in my new function, which is going to be 5x caret button 3, right arrow, minus 4x squared plus 2x minus 3. And then I'm going to go ahead and do zoom standard so that I know my windows, each of the axes start at -10 and go to +10, and each tick mark is at 1. And so here, I'm looking, and in the third quadrant, the graph is increasing. And the same with the fourth, it's going up. And then in the first quadrant, it's also increasing. So I need to find an answer that says that. So A, it talks about increasing the third quadrant. All right, that's correct. And it also talks about increasing in the first quadrant. Well, that's correct. So A is probably going to be my answer, but go through the other ones and check them out. B is decreasing in the second quadrant. There's no graph in the second quadrant, so it can't be B. C, it talks about increasing in the third quadrant. Okay, that's true. But decreasing in the fourth quadrant. It's increasing in the fourth quadrant, so C is not true. And then D, the graph decreases in the second quadrant. Well, once again, there's no graph in the second quadrant, so D can't be true. So that I've ruled out B, C, and D, so that means A has to be my final answer. This question is almost exactly the same, only a different function, so you're going to follow the same steps. You're going to go into y equals and clear out the old function and type in the new one. And so this is going to be x caret button 4, right arrow, plus x caret button 3, right arrow, minus 28x squared, plus 20x plus 48. And once you have it graphed, or once you have it entered, you can go ahead and graph it. And I like to do zoom standard just so I know where the window is starting and ending, since there's no numbers. And here, it's the choice A talks about it increasing in the third quadrant. So I look primary increasing. So I look at the third quadrant, which is right here, and it's increasing and decreasing. So to see which one it's primarily doing, I'm going to have to zoom out of this screen and make it bigger. So I'm going to go zoom out, which is choice 3. And I'm going to keep it centered at the origin, so I'm just going to leave it there at 0, 0, and press enter. And here it's zoomed out, and it looks like it's pretty skinny, but it's pretty tall. So that means I could go into window and just fine tune it how I want it to zoom. So I'm going to say, let's keep it at negative 15 to positive 15 for the x-axis, and then for the y though I'm going to go a little bit more so I can see a little bit better. So let's try negative 60 and positive 60, and here I'm probably going to have it go by 5 so it's not so cluttered. And so now I'm going to press graph, and now I can see where the graph turns in the top and bottom, but not down here. So that means I need to go further down. So I'm going to go into the window and have the y min be negative 100 and see if that helps. And so it doesn't really help, but I can see that it's getting closer. And we'll see if this is enough for me to be able to answer our problem. And so in the second quadrant, this is going to continue to go up and up and up forever. And so that means it's going to be, if you start from up here somewhere and go down, it's going to be decreasing left to right primarily because you have a bigger piece decreasing as it starts from negative infinity and just this little piece increasing. And so in the third quadrant though, it's going to be about the same because you're going to go down and it's going somewhere down here, it's going to loop back. So you have the same amount increasing and decreasing. So it's not primarily increasing, so it's not going to be A. Now B, it says it primarily decreases in the second quadrant, which is true. That's what we talked about here because it's starting somewhere up here in negative infinity and forever decreasing from that spot. It's going to be primarily decreasing. Now it talks about in the fourth quadrant though in B, it primarily decreases. But in the fourth quadrant here, it decreases and increases the same amount. Each piece of it decreasing and increasing is equal, so it's not going to be B. Now C talks about it primarily decreasing in the second quadrant, which that part's true, we've talked about that, and primarily increases in the first quadrant. So I have this piece here in the first quadrant that decreases, however, it's going to continue increasing forever into infinity. So since that increasing part is infinite, it's much bigger than this decreasing part. So it is primarily increasing in the first quadrant. So that part is true also, and that's going to make C my final answer. Thank you for joining us today, and I hope you learned something new.